I'm Farah Duro, and you're listening to the PCOS Revolution podcast. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the third season of the PCOS Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Farah Duro, and today, to kick off our third season, we have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Paul Magarelli, and he is a board-certified REI, reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist, who is also the founder and medical director of HQA fertility centers. And Dr. Magarelli is a strong advocate of traditional Chinese medicine, and he serves as a frequent lecturer worldwide on topics that range from infertility to PCOS, menopause, andropause, and the treatment of insulin resistance. So I'm so happy to have him here today. Welcome, Dr. Magarelli.
Thank you so much, Farah. Nice to speak with you today.
And I know that you've been working with acupuncturists and a lot of practitioners in our field for over a decade now, I believe. So it's been longer. And your wife's also an acupuncturist. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what brought you to work with an integrative care model that you're currently working in now.
Oh, I'd be glad to. Actually, I can blame it, if that's the right word, on Dr. Diane Credenda, my wife, who at the time I had opened up a practice in Colorado Springs. She came to visit. She had been working with a practice up in Denver, but she really felt strongly that the integration of traditional Chinese medicine and sort of an IVF doctor would be a good thing. And I was very resistant to the idea. She came in, visited, and I'm a very data-driven guy. I mean, I trained at Duke, I trained at UCLA, and I have a PhD in nutritional biochemistry and physiology. So I really challenged her and said, listen, as much as I'd like you to believe what you have to say, can you show me some data? And of course, she had just one paper, the Paulus study, and I said, yeah, just keep sending me this stuff, and that's fine. And over the course of about a year, she kept sending me stuff to read. Very persistent, if you know Diane. And I had at a point 5 patients where I was having real difficulty with getting them beyond beyond treatment to getting pregnant. And I felt exhausted of options, and I sent them to her. Of course, 3 out of 5 of them came back without my help pregnant. And I was challenged by the idea. And so, long story short, we did research together now almost 18 years. We've published many abstracts and papers. And as she said, research led to romance, and we ended up getting married in 2009. But really, I think the big issue for me was creating what I call one medicine, this concept of the patient as the focus, and it doesn't matter what the branch of medicine is. If there's a way we can help, let's figure it out. And I was part of the initial process of developing the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine, and I've been advisor to it now ever since its inception. Diane certainly has been a founding member and board member. And I have found that by integrating traditional Chinese medicine with Western medicine, you enhance, number one, the understanding of the patient, but 2, modalities are better defined because of that integration in the 2 points of view. And then finally, I think efficacy is obvious. I mean, our studies show at least a 20% improvement in live births using the Credenda Magarelli acupuncture protocol that was developed by Dr. Credenda. And so that's kind of what has kept me in the field. And today, all of my centers, the HQA fertility centers, will be integrated completely with fellowship trained acupuncturists, traditional Chinese medicine docs, and board certified reproductive endocrinologists.
I think that is extraordinary, and I do want to thank you for your contribution to our field, because I was the first we were part of the first group to sit for that board exam in 2008, and we didn't know what to expect, but I think that it's just adds a different layer of expertise to patients also trying to seek out acupuncturists who are knowledgeable in both languages in Eastern and Western fertility treatment, because, as you know, everything changes from day to day with reproductive medicine. So it's really crucial, I think, to have that So, if you could just share something we don't know about your area of expertise that women with PCOS we should know, what would that be?
Well, I am unique in that my PhD is in nutritional biochemistry and reproduction, and I did 10 years of work as a research scientist looking at sex-specific nutritional requirements for marine animal reproduction prior to becoming a physician. My unique area outside of reproductive medicine is in the area of bariatric medicine, which is I created the Advanced PCOS Institute, which actually transformed into the Institute for Sustained Health when the husbands and daughters and sons of my PCOS patients saw such dramatic improvements in their health that they wanted their husbands and children to benefit. So we transitioned from the Advanced PCOS Institute to the Institute for Sustained Health. And that then transitioned into the creation of a medical management of bariatric patients who are morbidly obese patients who either get surgery or medical management. And of course, with the obesity crisis that we see today, I took my many years of advanced training in nutrition and biochemistry and created a model for the management of PCOS patients and then again their families. And that in turn, because of the obesity associated with PCOS, then created two hospital-based integrated bariatric programs. It's integrated with medical management and surgical management. And so that's kind of something that most folks would not imagine a fertility doctor doing. I continue to publish in the area and I've worked with some of the best names in the field regarding the obesity crisis because, although it's, you don't have to be obese to be, if you have PCOS, but it unfortunately is a sequela of the insulin resistance that's developed because of the propensity for PCOS patients to be insulin resistant and thereby pre-diabetic. And so it really marries together very well. And the program that I developed actually shows significant impact on fertility as well as weight management and health overall. Such that about 25% of my patients who are just strictly in the Institute for Sustained Health's program, they actually get pregnant without my fertility assistance hat on. So
any medications with that program? Or
yes. Well, the answer is yes and yes. It is a lifestyle program, which I think is always your best approach, but it's not, and again, I'm using the term realistic. It's just so difficult given, again, I know your audience is international, but right now obesity is an international problem, but especially in the U.S., it's easy to say just change, your lifestyle and life will be perfect, but there are adjunctive medications, there are non-clinical things you can do in terms of support groups and education. There are certainly roles for mental health practitioners to get at root causes of behavior because it's a behavioral issue. Certainly movement, I don't use the term exercise, I think movement is critical, period. And despite everybody's protestations against it, there is this sense of, caloric deficiency that's required in any model. And you have to have a support system for that. And you have to have tricks. I always say we have to trick people into health, by giving them tools to delude their brains into thinking, they're splurging when in reality they're actually doing something that's contributing to their health instead of taking it away. So yes, lifestyle, medications. I'm unfazed by those who poo-poo medications as a way of helping couples. I do think it plays a role. I love allopathic medicine. I think drugs are good, despite what it says, and I think it's a complement. of that change on future generations of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So the first and foremost, the issue of PCOS, and I'll still use that term, or insulin resistance, is that it damages you. It damages your cardiovascular system. It damages your central nervous system. It damages your reproductive system. It negatively impacts you socially. It negatively impacts you psychologically. It certainly can create issues related to emotional instability associated with hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia. So managing PCOS is really about finding the root cause for damage in your system and mitigating it prior to getting pregnant or prior to just simply going out and having a good time. So understanding that excess androgens in a female, androgens being male hormones, is not really what the female system is designed to have. And that insulin, unfortunately, at high levels, and insulin resistance in particular, in the ovary leads to excess amounts of male hormones, which, despite the dermatologic issues of acne and hirsutism and acanthosis nigricans, the staining of the creases with dark pigment, it actually impacts, ovulation. It impacts reproductive function. It impacts the laydown of plaques within the cardiovascular system. Just as an aside, the whole idea of myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, it doesn't happen in women until age 51 and above, significantly, because typically in a non-PCOS patient, their androgens are low, whereas men, their androgens are always high and they tend to get plaque formation. So if a young lady, a young woman, is having androgen levels close to males, they're at greater cardiovascular risk than females who don't have that. So preventative management of the root causes of PCOS symptomatology, because today we have massive amounts of women who are misdiagnosed as having what is a sort of a hereditary PCOS, as more of an iatrogenic PCOS, in other words, caused by the environment that they're in. But the damage to the system is the same. So if you aren't having a genetic propensity for PCOS, but you manifest PCOS symptoms because of lifestyle, we'll use the term lifestyle generally, you still have to fix it from a health standpoint.
Right. And basically, we could say that it can set you up for diabetes and heart disease if it doesn't go treated, correct?
Totally agree. The correlation between the diagnosis of PCOS and cardiovascular disease and diabetes is not necessarily linear, but certainly suggests, a one-to-one impact.
And I mean, if you could think of the greatest aha moment you've had when you've seen a patient who is working with natural medicine and also Western medicine with PCOS, what would you say that moment has been?
Well, the number one moment that Diane helped me understand, that's Diane Credenda, was that in allopathic or Western medicine, we define PCOS as a thing. Whereas in traditional Chinese medicine, it could be 20 to 30 things, each with a hint at the etiology and possible therapeutic intervention. That was amazing to me when I would talk to Diane about how do you see this in Chinese medicine? And she'd have this ungodly list of ways it's seen, which also provides areas in which you can intervene. So the biggest aha moment was, gosh, if I work with traditional Chinese medicine docs, they will give me way more insight into what's going on with that patient than simply what I would define them as, which is really one definition. The other thing was on the Western medicine side, specifically on the nutrition side, the role of starvation. Most of our PCOS patients are starving, even though they may be overweight or they may be obese or they may have issues related to excess fat. They're starving. Every one of the cells that we worry about, brain, muscle, bones, and eyeballs, those are starving, whereas fat cells are accumulating at a rapid rate because fat cells don't have the propensity for insulin resistance, as do muscle cells, brain cells, etc. So my aha moment was the way to treat PCOS is to feed these patients. It's not to where everyone wants to do diet and exercise and starvation as a model of managing. As a matter of fact, the more I can get my PCOS patients to eat appropriately, though, their route towards wellness is accelerated. So many of us, unfortunately, had the bias that if you're overweight, it's because you have gluttony of some sort. But if you divide the person not into an entity, but into 3.6 trillion cells and understand how the cells work, you actually realize that these poor patients' cells are starving, even though they're accumulating fat. And so those two very unique perspectives on insulin resistance PCOS it changed everything for me as a scientist physician, and certainly it helped me create the Institute for Sustained Health and the bariatric wellness programs, because it was like, oh my God, these obese patients, most of which are, if they're female, tend to have PCOS-like symptoms, are starving. And if you get them to traditional Chinese medicine docs, they will reveal, because of your terminology, reveal another way of looking at this syndrome. And so I would say those are like two biggest ones.
That is definitely a light bulb moment, because we have a lot of patients who come in saying, I don't know I'm gaining weight. I'm not eating anything. I just don't eat anything, and I just keep gaining weight. And it's one of the most frustrating things about PCOS, I think, is because by the time they come to us, they've already tried every single weight loss program and exercise program. And also they're exercising quite a bit, I have to say, a lot of patients that are coming in. So it's not that they are not trying. It's just that it's the level of frustration has just reached its height. And I think when you give someone a plan, like, okay, these foods are great for you and you should eat them as much as possible, then that's kind of like, whoa, you mean I can eat more?
Can't do that.
Yeah.
Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Well, here's the other thing, and this is what blew my mind, is that there is no data in animals or humans that has ever demonstrated exercise to create weight loss. There are none. Rats, mice, humans, not one piece of data supports the idea that increasing exercises increases weight loss. What it does do is it reduces the weight gain, which is not the same thing. And for humans, it's about 90 minutes daily of high-intensity exercise for it to have a neutralizing effect, not a weight loss effect. So my PCOS patients are not allowed to exercise the first year.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's remarkable how by simply changing the paradigm and saying you're starving and exercise is only causing you to get weight gain, that's enough to knock them off their sense of normal order in the universe, which has not served them. The order of the universe of diet and exercise equals weight loss has never worked, but for some reason, they're the failure, not the medical institutions demanding it. So to knock that pedestal off that pedestal that this is the way to view it and view it differently, now you have an opportunity. You have a learning opportunity, a teaching opportunity, a therapeutic interventional opportunity. So with a deep understanding of the root causes, it helped me go, okay, this is going to work. And that's, I guess, how the practice grew so dramatically and we've continued to develop in this area is change your perspective. If that perspective never succeeds, then it's not you who's the problem. It's the perspective that's the problem.
Well, everybody now just sighed this big sigh of relief, like, are you serious? I don't have to kill myself at the gym?
That is so true. That is so true. Yeah, most PCOS patients exercise more than others and eat less than others and gain weight easier than others. So that's just the biggest unfairness in the universe. But you know what? That's okay, as long as you understand it and we have a tool. Let's use the tool and go forward.
While we're on the subject of diet, do you have one that you recommend more? Let's say keto, low carb,
Mm-hmm.
any of paleo. What
Sure,
would be
sure.
the?
Let me help you on that. A couple of things. Um, Diet is consumption of foods that provide health and wellness and energy to do the activities that you really would like to do. Another way of looking at diet is dying with a T. DIET is dying with a T. If you diet, you're asking your body to kill itself, right? Deprive itself, get to zero. The end of a diet is to die. I mean, that's your removing. If the goal then is how do I nourish the trillions of cells I have, how do I reduce the propensity to add fat instead of energy or heat, then the answer is as straightforward as the biochemistry. If you understand that the biochemistry of insulin resistance, of PCOS is insulin resistance, and again, that would be a whole lecture, but let's assume it is, then anything you can do to reduce insulin resistance will mean that your cells will use the food for heat and building things as opposed for fat accumulation and storing things. So anything that causes dramatic increases in insulin would be damaging because it would make you more insulin resistant and push you more towards fat accumulation. Anything that is neutral, which means it does neither, can be used as energy. And anything that is expensive to metabolize, which means it tends to take 25% of the energy of the food and just simply in the process of eating or metabolizing would be advantageous because then you can get that satiety thing. So here's my easiest rule of thumb for this whole process. Carbohydrates causes a dramatic increase in insulin secretion. Even the thought of that cookie or pancake or cake, the very thought of it causes a dramatic increase in insulin. Proteins are very expensive to be metabolized by the body. You lose 25% of the calories within the protein just to simply get it into the body, and it builds things. It repairs things. Fats, on the other hand, are fairly neutral. They come and they go and do whatever the heck they want. They don't cause fat accumulation. Fat never does that, although that's the misunderstanding about fat. So you would want something that has a relatively low carbohydrate amount, a moderate amount of protein because it's a great satiety and it's expensive, and a fairly high amount of fat because it does serve as a nice alternative for energy, which doesn't cause insulin oversecretion. So a high fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate approach. And then this idea of keto, paleo, and all this other malarkey, which are cute names, the real thing is it's food and how is it consumed inside you. So you don't have to be on a thing, but if it gives you a pattern, the pattern is to approach ketosis. Why? Well, ketosis is just simply fat burning. That's really all it is. It's not magic. It's simply fat burning. So your goal would be into a fat burning, energy optimizing system. So for everyone, getting down to about a 50 gram of total carbohydrates a day while maintaining a slightly higher amount of caloric fat consumption as opposed to protein with enormous amounts of fluids and electrolytes, because the electrolytes are critical as you lower your carbohydrate consumption, or else you're going to get fatigue and kind of a flu-like symptoms. So anything that does that does that. So we were joking about breakfast this morning, but a typical breakfast for a person would be a couple of eggs in the morning, cooked in butter, real butter, maybe a couple of slices of bacon and some sliced avocados, and some maybe flaxseed and some salt and pepper, or maybe some turmeric on it. So that's a very simple one plate, 5-minute kind of thing. 10 o'clock or so, maybe a piece of cheese. Noon or so, anything green and crunchy is a vegetable you want to eat, so above the ground greens. Lots of olive oil, maybe slices of cheese, some walnuts, some chicken or pork. Then, 3 or 4 in the afternoon, maybe, you have some almonds, a handful of almonds. Then, 5 or 6, you come home, You have a nice steak, a good ribeye, really fat and juicy. Maybe put some butter on it. Cook some with asparagus, put some butter on it. Then just put some butter on the butter. And then a nice glass of Cabernet. And then maybe at the end of the day, you eat a fat bomb, which is dark chocolate and coconut. And, that's a life. To me, that's a life.
And
And
yeah, and I think that I run into issues sometimes when someone comes in saying that they're vegan and they have PCOS.
yeah, absolutely.
And I'm like, okay, let's think of protein sources. I know there's lots, and but that's one of the challenges that we face
Yes.
sometimes.
Well, proteins and fats are building blocks of cells, muscles, energy, blah, blah. Carbohydrates are just simply sources of energy. It's like gasoline. It's not the car. So in the vegan community, again, I get confused with vegan and lacto-ovo pescatarian, blah, blah, blah. I just don't, it's hard to say what they're talking about, but if someone absolutely doesn't have access to any sources of animal protein of any sort, be it from cheese or eggs or meats or fish or fowl or what have you, yeah, that's a real challenge, and I'm not quite sure. I'm not. I've kind of zoned out because the only way you can do it is things with like spirulina or other sources of hemp-based protein or pea powder proteins, just to get the protein part of it. But fortunate or unfortunate, they tend to also they tend to be also low fat. So, and that's scary from a standpoint of brain physiology, because right now they're actually considering, and are really seriously considering, Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. And it's just simply insulin resistance of the brain. And so without fat, which is what the brain is made of, you end up creating, literally, it shrinks and plaques form and communication doesn't work. And so that was my biggest concern, is adequate amounts of oils. You can pretty much find a protein that's plant-based. It's hard not to have a lot of carbohydrates, though, as a vegan. But again, you have to do the dance of what works for you. So I don't have a quick and easy answer for vegans. I don't.
What is the one thing that you wish every woman with PCOS in the world knew?
That they're starving. If they understand that their cells are starving, once you feed your cells, you will manage your PCOS. And how do you do that is with something relatively large amounts of fat, moderate amounts of protein, low amounts of carbs. And once you get your brain in the right place, because your brain it uses about 25% of what you consume just to run it, to run that machine. And if that machine is starving, decision making, willpower, emotions, and all that get disoriented or dysfunctional. So if you would trust that your goal is to feed, not diet, and to function, not simply limit, I think that will go a long way for them to make better decisions. There's lots of information out there, but the decisions are confusing.
I always say the most important decision of the day that you'll probably come across with PCOS is what you have for breakfast. Because if that goes wrong, then everything else, snowballs. It's just, it's just so important.
By the way, that's a very good point, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it up. And that is, the more you eat, the hungrier you will be if you eat foods that enhance insulin secretion, because insulin secretion will pull all of your blood sugar into fat production, which in turn starves you. Before I understood about PCOS, I have insulin resistance of the worst kind, both from a family history and personally. And I used to eat a bowl of organic, rice flour pasta, and not a soup bowl, but a salad bowl full. And I would be starving at the end of it, and it drove my wife crazy, and I was following 2 nutritionist guidelines and blah, blah, blah. And the more you eat the wrong foods, the more you need to eat the wrong foods. That's the conundrum. That's the catch-22. And the less you eat of the wrong foods, the less you eat, period. And there's your diet. That's again the remarkable thing is as you shift to a food that actually feeds your cells become sated. And once they're sated, you move on to other activities, hopefully more fun. And so that's a big thing.
That's pretty. I think that if I always say, can you think about a protein source with every meal, just something, and that does keep you full longer. And I know that even if you don't have PCOS, just in general, I think it's helpful.
I agree.
So I think that we talked a little bit about before the call about this recent study that came out, basically saying that they found pretty much the reason for PCOS and why it existed, and it involved genetic components to PCOS and mentioned AMH. So I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit about that.
Sure. I think the study was talking about the increased incidence and why that was happening, and it was essentially traced back to changes in food consumption over the past 50 years. And here's the short version. Epigenetics is the study of the impact of the environment on the expression of the genes of which we all have, which is the human genome. And that expression is impacted positively and negatively by the environment, whether it's exposure to starvation or, in this case, exposure to excess amounts of insulinogenic foods. And what they were suggesting is that the root cause of this increase in PCOS and thereby AMH is simply a marker of follicular activity. And PCOS patients tend to have persistent folliculogenesis without maturation to ovulation. So AMH is typically elevated in PCOS patients, but step back, what is the why of that? And that is due to the enhanced exposure to insulin, remarkable insulin levels. So in the fetus, which gets all the glucose and none of the insulin from the mom's consumption of high carbohydrate foods, so what you're pouring into the fetus is nothing but glucose, but the insulin molecule is too big, so it can't cross the placenta. So therefore, this baby is being exposed during fetal development to excessive amounts of insulinogenic molecules, glucose, without the insulin to mitigate it. So the baby has to then work super hard with their own pancreas to manage that, as well as change the brain development of that child that's developing, especially a female. Males not so much, of course, but females in particular, because they're not supposed to be exposed to that much androgen producing insulin IGF, insulin-like growth factors, causes androgen production even in the fetal ovaries. So yes, generationally, and I tell my patients this, my fertility patients all the time, just remember, as you manage your PCOS, you're actually helping your grandchildren. You are reducing the chances that your daughter and your daughter's daughter, your grandchild, will have PCOS, which of course the concomitant elevation in AMH. So it's a surrogate marker of excess amounts of insulin secretion in the fetus. So man, if you don't want to do it for yourself, definitely do it for your daughter and your grandchildren. And so that was the cool thing for me. I mean, that's the cool thing about that study, is that it sort of demonstrated that, oh my God, the answer is yes. What we do as pregnant moms absolutely influence our daughter's life and our daughter's daughter's life, and probably your daughter's 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 life.
And would that explain the higher incidence of gestational diabetes as well?
Totally. There is a high correlation. High correlation between PCOS and gestational diabetes, and there's a high correlation of PCOS with gestational diabetes in the mom. So again, generation and generation and generation.
Interesting, yes. And, we're reading also about high testosterone levels during pregnancy and how that can cause, I think that was a researcher recently put this out, that, it can also influence the daughter's health. And throughout, so what can be done prior to pregnancy, just as a takeaway
Simple. Simple but impossible to do easily. And that is understand that there was a medical mistake in 1970s, which gave the impression that carbs were good. There was such a thing as good carbs, and that fats were bad. It was a misunderstanding of the data. And it fed into an industry of low-fat dieting and low-fat foods, which, of course, concomitantly would cause enormous increases in sugar content. So a low-fat muffin has twice to 3 times the sugar, or else it wouldn't be palatable. So we created these monsters, not on purpose, of industries that will feed into whatever it is we say we want to consume. So if now we say, okay, that's a fundamental error, and we go back 100 years or 200 years and say, okay, how did people consume? Or let's even go back to 1940. I mean, the average man's pant size in 1940 was 28 to 30. Today, the average man's pant size is 38 to 44. So that's just the average. So if we trust ourselves to say that our ancestors had a pretty damn good idea of how to eat, and we understand that this packaged foods and those kinds of things only contribute to increased sugar consumption, and if we can do something to get around that, we would actually create a situation prior to pregnancy in which you would be more fertile. More fertile because you're going to ovulate. And as I said, 25% of my patients in the Advanced PCOS Institute got pregnant on their own, even though they originally came to me for fertility. We moved them to the Advanced PCOS Institute so that they could manage their PCOS. They got pregnant on their own, so that's good. And then, of course, if they can maintain that during their when they're pregnant, then the impact on the daughters would be reduced. And also, they would not be as likely to get gestational diabetes, get hypertension and pregnancy-induced hypertension, and then down the road, of course, diabetes and real hypertension. So that's how I would caution or recommend to your clientele that listen in.
So, and do you believe that PCOS can be 100% reversed?
I don't think there's. I mean, I think PCOS is a wonderful survival mechanism. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I keep telling my PCOS patients, you are the perfect humans. You are the perfect humans if we lived in famine. And prior to 10,000 years ago, we lived in famine. So the most ideal woman, as you can see from primitive artifacts, the Venus, statues, these are morbidly obese. They were considered perfect females. And so today, the only issue we have is we don't have famine. If we had famine, the best treatment for PCOS is living on a desert island with very little food except for fish and some seaweed. I mean, there you go. Green, crunchy vegetables and a wonderful source of protein and very little carbs. So yeah. So
I see a retreat idea coming.
I'm there. I like it. I want to go. But really, it's that simple. There's nothing wrong. However, we are not a society associated with famine, and it's impossible to have famine almost anywhere, certainly in the United States or Australia or what have you. So let's give up on the idea that, famine is where we're going to live and figure out how to live with plenty and be able to make better choices.
And what would you, if you could think of an internet resource for a woman with PCOS, what would you recommend?
I don't have one. I unfortunately I view all of them. And maybe it's just your website, floridacompletewellness.com.
All right.
Because I think there's too much misinformation and really too many lost folks, and I think it's scary. But in terms of other resources, like a book, Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes is fantastic. Good Fats, Good Calories, Bad Calories, fantastic. It's a really digs deep into the genesis of why we are where we are. And again, he's looking at obesity, but just look at insulin because it's about insulin. Those are two books that I think are just in my library that I I can go back to 100 times and get a nugget of information. Now, the why we get fat is sort of the dumbed down version of good calories, bad calories. And what I mean dumbed down is that in the good calories, bad calories, there's kind of all kinds of references and research, and it's exhaustive. I mean, he's a scientific journalist. But the good why we get fat is sort of just the key kernels of what he's trying to teach in this big tome. So, but I think the audience can absolutely read the good calories, bad calories, and get a huge amount out of it.
Oh, definitely. We'll post that up and post a link to that in our show notes. And I'm just going to end with a parting piece of guidance for our listeners and the best way we can connect with you.
Oh, well, my name is Dr. Paul Magarelli, and I think there's not another one in the world, so that's easy. Info at hqafertilitycenters.com. www.hqaivf.com, or just my name associated with PCOS, or just simply my name associated with reproduction. My goal really is to have folks like you and others understand the principles, because I don't think you need a fancy schmancy degree if you understand the physiology and the biology or biochemistry of humans. Remember that your audience, PCOS, you're the perfect female. There's nothing more perfect than you. You represent the finest in reproductive potential in an environment which there's famine. So since you're not there, then you have to change a little to be in an environment of plenty, but that's okay too, because that also gives you a survival benefit. That fertility is inherent in your genes and inherent in you as a human. So you are fertile. It's not that you're infertile. It's just that you're just because of issues related to insulin resistance, you're not as optimal, and you can be more optimal just with little changes. You got to get good resources. I think certainly traditional Chinese medicine docs are a phenomenal resource, especially fellows in the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine. They've taken extra training and they really understand the West-East. And then, you are allowed to ask your doctor to work with an integrative physician, a Western doctor, and say, listen, I would like to work together with these docs, and we're here to help me be better, me being the patient. And, anything you can do to feel better about yourself is always a good thing. So just if you could take the takeaway that you represent the finest in what it is to be a female, I think that's a great place to start.
I think that's been the most amazing takeaway we've ever had on this show. Thank you, Dr. Paul Magarelli. Ladies, you are perfect.
Well, they tell me that every day, so I can only believe them.
Yeah. Well, we already knew.
Right, exactly. But it takes me a long time.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure, and we will definitely invite you back for more conversations. And ladies, please don't forget to go to our Facebook page and check out our links that we've spoken about today. Have a wonderful week. That's the end of this episode of the PCOS Revolution podcast. If you've enjoyed the show and want to help me spread the word about how women with PCOS and hormonal imbalances can lead happier, more healthier lives, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to have a question answered on the show or would like to recommend a guest, please go to floridacompletewellness.com/podcast. If you're on social media, you can follow me at facebook.com/Florida Complete Wellness and twitter.com/Florida Complete, where I post a lot of interesting research, webinars, and articles on our blog about really getting to the root of hormonal imbalances like PCOS. So it's a great way to stay in touch with the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening, and see you soon.